Let's talk about 4 game design problems that I decided to coin, named after various RPG classes. Now, two things to keep in mind. First and foremost, these names are only for remembering. By naming something after a class, I am not implying that every instance of this class shares the problem, nor am I implying that this problem is unique only to that type of class. Second of all, these might not even be problems. Maybe they are welcome in some types of games. These are just things that I generally try to avoid. That being said, let's talk about the simplest one of them all, and what's simpler, and a humble fighter. You can surely relate to this. What does the fighter do in combat? Attack, 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 and maybe the action surge to attack some more. What's the problem here? The fighter is doing the same thing every single time. And that's what the fighter problem is all about. The fighter problem is when the player has a lack of options in which actions to take. Whether it is in actual actions that the player gets to pick from, or which ones are optimal or not. Speaking of variety, let's talk about the second class, which has a whole bunch of variety. The Ranger problem. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the original version of Ranger in 5th edition, but they used to pick favored terrain such as coast, mountains, grasslands, as well as favored enemies like dragons, demons, and so on. What's the problem here then? What happens in a game in which you encounter no mountains and no dragons when your ranger is specialized on navigating the mountains and fighting dragons? Well, that's what you learn. That's when you learn about the ranger problem, which is conditional player options. Player options which are useful only in some rather specific scenarios. Now the third problem comes from a class idea that will sound very similar, which is navigator. But unlike ranger, who is about navigating the wilderness and so on, this one came from a discussion about ships. Specifically, how could play surrounding the revolving around ships be made more interesting? And the idea is as follows. You assign people roles, such as the captain, or the guy at the helm, or cannoneers. Everyone wants to be at the cannons, right? Well, how do we solve this? Because these are pretty much all the interesting roles. Everything else we come up with is not going to be important in, say, naval combat or something. The idea that I've heard proposed was to introduce the navigator class, whose task it would be to navigate the ship, to make sure it avoids dangers such as shallow waters and so on. But the problem there is that it's necessary. Is it fun though? The navigator problem is when a class or some option within the game is necessary but not necessarily fun. The final problem comes from the world of cyberpunk. The hackers. Let's set the stage. It's a modern world. Internet is everywhere. Futuristic dystopia. And you have this ragtag group of criminals who are doing all sorts of jobs for the fixers to earn what little coin they can have. And among them, you will probably encounter a hacker. That one guy who accesses all the technology and makes sure all the doors are open for the players. Hacking could be done as a sort of mini-game which the hacker gets to engage with, and the GM engages with it as well. And sure, that sounds like a lovely time. What's the problem then? Well, after 15 minutes of hacking, you'll look at the rest of the table and see something along these lines. And that's certainly not something you want. So the hacker problem is when the focus is only on few players, one or few of them, instead of everyone. That would be it for the 4 problems. Now, how do I resolve this is a great question. When it comes to the fighter problem, the solution seems obvious. You need to provide more options and make sure they are all somewhat viable. Peter from Tales from Elsewhere channel has a great video on that I will probably link in the description below. Navigator problem is solved by not doing that. I know it's a silly way to solve it, but if it's necessary, it's not fun. And I think you should focus on things in the game that are fun without necessarily expecting people to be doing chores like navigation. Make navigation fun. The ranger problem, which I somehow skipped for a moment. Solve it by making every option matter. Instead of specializing the ranger on slaying, say, hordes of minions that are, I don't know what creature type would fit that, the undead, hordes of undead, make them slay hordes instead. That could be pretty interesting, you know, transferring the skills from slaying hordes of undead into slaying hordes of demons or hordes of Uzis. As for the hacker problem, my personal way of solving it is to allow everyone to be engaged in this activity. In other words, sure, hacker can be the best one when it comes to hacking encounters, but allow everyone to participate. That's it from me though. What do you guys think? Do you have any more problems that could be labeled as fantasy or RPG classes? And if so, please write them in the comments below. I would love to hear about them. Thank you for watching, and have a nice century.